In terms of caring for other people, how many of you guys in what you talked about had some aspect of communication? Exactly. It's really hard to care for people without communicating something to them, right? And so today what we're going to talk about in this next little section is all about communication. Just so you guys know, we are moving on to section 4. So we are moving through this book. Great job, guys. All right. So we started off with ministry, and then we moved to leadership, and then we moved to care. Now we're going to move to communication. So what I want you guys to think about first is, what is communication? What would you say communication is if you were defining it? What is communication? We do it a lot.
Yeah, say it louder.
All right, so I'm hearing listening.
The action of speaking and listening.
All right, the action of speaking and listening.
To the point that it's understood.
Right.
To the point that it's understood. Anything else?
Transfer of information between parties.
All right, the transfer of information.
She said exchanging ideas.
Exchanging ideas. So all of those things that I'm hearing from you guys is that communication is not just one way, correct? That if you are really communicating with somebody, it's going both ways. And as you guys, one of the things I loved listening to you talk about the different ways that you were caring for these people, is that most of you guys had some element of listening in what you were saying. That actually, before you started talking, you started out with listening. And so many times, I think we get that in reverse. We tell all the things that we think that that person needs to know, and then we listen for their response to what we've just told them. Instead of saying, hey, where are you? How are you doing? Instead of questioning, instead of not just reacting on our own assumptions, we actually seek to figure out what is going on with them. And so what we're going to do in this next time is really think about how are we called to communicate with others, and what does that look like for us in terms of listening and in terms of speaking. So Nita brought up the heart principles and went over those earlier, and some of you guys I noticed were familiar with those and others were not. I wanted to go ahead and post those. I think this is going to be in your notebook at some point, but since we're talking about communication, if you are not familiar with the heart principles, these are great rules and principles that you can use in your communication with other people. In leading meetings, they become great reminders of how we are called to be respectful communicators of each other, to listen as well as speak. So these are some great principles. There are some other ones in your book on page 60, and they kind of use the word respect and kind of break down the respectful communications guidelines. What does it look like to have this respectful kind of communication? R, take responsibility for what you say and feel without blaming others. E is empathetic listening, which I think somebody brought up earlier, that empathy is a really big part of caring. Try to understand how the other person feels. S, be sensitive to differences in communication styles. Do you guys know that we can speak the same language and not be speaking the same language?
Yes.
Yes. Have you ever been on the receiving end of that where you're like, I'm pretty sure I'm speaking English, but you are not understanding what I'm saying? So we need to be sensitive to differences in communication styles, which means that it's not as much about what I'm saying and how I'm communicating. It's about how do you learn and how do you receive what I'm saying. It's knowing and being in tune to the receiver as much as you are, or if not more, than what you want to get across, okay? P, ponder on what you hear and feel before you speak. Think before you speak is what your mama always said, right? This is what they're telling us to do, that we need to think about it and think about not only what we think, but how we're feeling about that as well. Examine your own assumptions and perceptions. Remember we talked about that shedding process where we recognize and go ahead and name what we're bringing to the table. So a lot of that is our own assumptions and perceptions. C, keep confidential what others have to say. That is so important. That is so important, especially in ministry. Because when someone trusts you enough to open up to you, that is a gift they are giving you. That is a precious, precious gift, and we need to keep that confidence. Tolerate what others have to say, especially if it's a point of view that you don't necessarily agree with or see. Let's figure out how we can be tolerant. Let's figure out how we can have open hands, and let's figure out how we can give people the space to share and express themselves, even if it's not a point of view that I share. So all of the heart principles are here. The respect principles are here. Here's what I want you guys to talk about at your table is if you would identify one key that you think is just crucial, that you have found in your own life and leadership is crucial for respectful communication, what is it? So if there's, and it could be one of these that's already on here, you don't have to reinvent something, but for you, what is the one thing that you're like, this is what I have found really, really is very powerful in terms of communication with other people. So I want you guys to share your one big key with the people sitting at your table. Go ahead and do that now.
Take that, let's just,
Did you guys learn some good wisdom for people at your table? Heard some good wisdom being given for sure. So as we think about communication, one of the things that you guys said was it's important for us to speak, but it's also important for us to listen. And in order to be good listeners, do you guys know what we also have to be? Good questioners. Because a lot of times we're just worried about communicating the information. But in order to provide an opportunity for others to speak, we've got to learn how to ask really good questions. And then we've got to learn how to be quiet. Because sometimes we'll ask a good question, and then there's a little bit of silence, and then we get a little bit nervous. And so then we start answering the question that we've just asked, right? And then we take over the space that we have given for other people to respond. One of the things that I heard one time in terms of communication and speaking and listening was this 30%, 70% rule, okay? So talking about being in charge of a meeting and facilitating a meeting, the person said, we need to, as meeting facilitators, speak 30% of the time and listen 70% of the time. And how often, as meeting facilitators, do we speak 70% of the time and listen 30% of the time? And so as we begin to become better communicators, I think one of the most important things that we can do is become better questioners. And to ask the kinds of questions that help people move beyond just the surface level things that they're thinking, and really begin to help them identify things at the core, things at the root, identify things that they haven't thought about. And remember when we talked about servant leadership, we said what's really, really important is for us to provide a space of discovery. You know how you do that a lot of times? Is through questions. When you throw out a question, and it's not a question that, hey, I'm going to ask you a question that leads you in the direction I want you to go. That's not the kind of questions I'm talking about, okay? When it's asking a question that you genuinely want to know the answer to. You genuinely are curious about what will happen and what will be said in the space of this question. And so what we're going to do today is practice our questioning ability, okay? And I'm going to challenge you guys in just a moment. You're going to be coming up with some questions. But we are not looking for yes-no questions, okay? We are looking for questions that, there's a book that I've been reading called A Beautiful Question. And it talks about, Warren Berger is the author of this book, and he talks about how there are beautiful questions that spark innovation and change and growth. Those are the kinds of questions that we want to be asking. Not just surface level, yes or no, do you agree or do you not agree? But beautiful questions that spark innovation and change and growth in the life of another person. So what we're gonna do is, you've got some index cards at your table. I'd like for everyone to take 3 index cards and a pen.
Okay. I don't know how many's there, but
And then
Might get
here's
more
what
for you.
we're going to do.
I'll give you both.
Yes. And in your notebook, I'd like for you to turn to page 12 in your notebook, because there are 3 things that you're going to be writing on these index cards.
Page 12.
Page 12 in your notebook.
Is that session 4?
Yep. All right. So the activity that we're going to do is called Question Scramble. And here's what I'm going to need you guys to do first. I'm going to need you to answer 3 prompts for me. The first one, you're going to write 1 on each of these cards, okay? So the first one is, my biggest struggle in ministry is, whatever that is, you finish, fill in the blank. The next one, a dream I have for my community is. And the third one thing that frustrates me is, okay? And your frustration could be ministry frustration, or it could be that my kid doesn't make his bed, whatever it is, okay? So you can have lots of frustrations, but just name 1, okay? So go ahead and do that on each of those 3 cards, and then I'm gonna give you guys some directions moving forward. Let me share a story with you now. I have, when I focus on something, when I've really paid attention, I lean in and I kind of squint my eyes. And you see my little wrinkle there? I have a lifelong friend who used to tell me when we were growing up, quit that, you're gonna have a wrinkle. Well, she was right, I have a wrinkle. I am the newly elected conference secretary. Yay!
Is that
That
promotion
means-
or friendship?
Well, I'm not sure yet, I'll let you know. That means that next year at annual conference, I get to sit on the stage right next to the bishop for the whole of the conference. And I'm thinking, I can't sit up there and lean in. People will think that I'm making ugly faces, you know, that I'm frowning at them. So I have very consciously been trying to change that. When I realize that I'm leaning in and I'm starting to make my focus face, I try to lean back and smile. It just opens up my body posture and gives me a pleasant look on my face. I have a good friend who's trained in body language. I know that my process is working because 3 times in the last 6 weeks we've been having conversations, and he said, "What are you smiling about?" I finally had to say to him, okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm not just suddenly smiling at something you're saying. I'm trying to be conscious of my body language so that I present a more receptive presence at annual conference next year. You see the numbers on the board? What do you think those numbers are? Have you read ahead of your notes?
Holistic communication.
738?
38.
38? Okay.
Football call?
This, here we go. These are what these numbers are.
Holistic communication.
Is it in the notebook?
Page 12.
When people are listening to you, this is what they perceive. 7% of what they receive are the words that you say. 38% of what they receive is the tone of voice that you use.
I knew it.
I tell that to my teenager all the time.
Yes. I was just thinking about
But they're a
teenagers.
teenager, they don't believe anything.
55% is the rest is your body language. So let me just ask you something. If you're talking to someone
Are they going to hear the words you're saying if your tone and or your body language is not receptive?
No.
No. That's why I'm working on my body language, because before I have to sit at annual conference, I know what my focus face looks like, and the people who really know me know what my focus face looks like, but the rest of the annual conference doesn't know what my focus face looks like. So before the end of this class, y'all all need to take my cell phone number, so at annual conference next year, if you see me start with the focus face, you text me and say, quit with the focus face. Right now.
Smile.
On page 62 and 63, there's a list of things that you can do to practice active listening. Now, how many of you have watched the movie Hitch? Ever seen Hitch? I love that movie. If you haven't watched Hitch, watch it. I realize it's a romantic comedy, more for girls, I know that, but at least watch the first 20 to 25 minutes of it, because the premise of Hitch is that Will Smith is the date doctor, and he can work with men and help them get dates. And what he does in the first 20 to 25 minutes of the movie as he's working with this one particular man is he's coaching him on active listening skills and how to participate in a relationship. It's excellent coaching. He says things to the man like, be present in the moment, listen to what she's saying, so that when she asks a question, you're ready to respond and actually answer her question. So if you haven't watched Hitch, watch the first little bit of it. And if you have watched Hitch, go back and watch the first little bit of it, because it's excellent advice on communication. That's really all he's teaching. Now what I want you to do is look down through page 62 and 63. We're going to take just a minute, and I want you to put a star next to one thing that you need to improve on, and I want you to write out beside it at least one step, if not 2 or 3, that you're going to take to help improve on that. And if you heard my story about what I'm doing with my focus face, you will see that the things that I'm talking about are in the section show that you are listening. So find one thing that you need to be better at, and name a couple of things that you're going to consciously do to be better. Let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer this question out loud for the group, but before you started identifying one thing that you needed to improve on and ways you could improve, did you ask God what He thought? Just say it.
Nice.
Just say it. We are people with stories, aren't we? And we love to tell our stories. And we love sometimes to hear other stories, don't we? Yeah. I'm reading a book right now. It's a little bit of an older book, but for those of y'all who serve in leadership positions in the church, I'd encourage you to read it. It's called Know Your Story and Lead From It. It's an excellent book. So one of the best ways we can connect with people is through stories. You know, if you walk up to somebody with the Bible and say, let me tell you why you need to read this, they're going to look at you like you've lost your mind. And you just, they're not listening anymore. But if you say, let me tell you a story, or let me share something with you, they might listen for a little while. One of the stories that I use when I'm talking to people, I know my 3 favorite scriptures. They're in a particular order, which is actually, now that I think of it, exactly backwards as how they're found in Scripture. But there's a reason they're in that order. There's a reason they appeal to me. There's a reason they help tell my story. And I can explain. These are my 3 favorite scriptures and why. If someone says, what does that book mean to you? I can say, let me tell you a story. And I can tell the story using my 3 favorite scriptures. So find some stories like that that you can have ready, so that if you have somebody who says, why are you wearing that cross? What does it mean to you? You say, let me tell you a story about that. And you'll draw them in a whole lot more than if you try to whop them over the head with the Bible. That's never a good way to win friends and influence people. But you need to know how to tell your story relatively quickly, because sometimes you only get a minute. Sometimes you only get 3 minutes. Sometimes you open a door that allows for longer conversations. I'm going to share my story, and the trick is going to be to try to do it in 3. This is 3 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, here we go. I have never known a day that I did not know that God existed from a small child. I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s. My parents routinely told me, never let anybody tell you you can't do something because you're a girl. God called me to preach when I was leading a youth group meeting. I don't tell youth that. It might scare them off from coming to youth group. I went to my preacher, and my preacher told me all the reasons why women couldn't be preachers. And I believed him. 6 or 7 years later, I went to another preacher. He did the same thing. And I believed him. So I spent 17 years telling God why I couldn't do what he was calling me to do. Even though God had been preparing me, and my parents, God had been using my parents to prepare me, I was still telling him why I couldn't do what I needed to do. And then I ended up at Lake Park. And John and Lori know some of this story because of our connection through Lake Park. But in one of the worst times of spiritual issues for me, God was telling me, this is what I'm calling you to do. You have to trust me. You have to do it. And I'm going, I can't. And finally I said one night, Lord, I have just messed up so bad through all of these years. Look at the mess I've made of my life. What do I have to say? You're calling me to be a preacher. What do I have to say that anybody wants to hear? He said nothing. And that stopped me in my tracks, because that was not the answer I expected. And I said, okay, Lord, now that you have my attention, you're going to have to explain that one, because you're calling me to preach. What do you mean I have nothing to say? And he sent me to Luke 21, 14 and 15. Make up your minds beforehand not to worry about how you will defend yourselves, for I will give you words of wisdom. I didn't need to worry about what to say, because if I answered God's call to preach, he would give me the words to use. Still wasn't quite convinced. And I said, okay, Lord, if I make this change, you'd better make it good. The next Sunday I went to church at Lake Park, went to the altar in tears, and said, God is calling me to preach. The preacher that met me at the altar that Sunday morning was Richard Sober. And Richard's answer was, hallelujah. Come see me tomorrow. We'll start the process.
Amen.
And here I am.
Glory to God.
And that's my story in 2 minutes and 58 seconds. So, I want y'all to partner up. I think that's what we're supposed to be doing. Yes, work with a partner, use the 3-minute timer, tell your story to each other in 3 minutes. Now, take just a minute before you start and think about your story. I have told my story a multitude of ways over the last 20 years, from a short version to a very long version, so I've had some practice with it. Y'all think about your story. If someone says, give me 3 minutes of your story and tell me why Jesus Christ is important to you, what are you going to say in that 3 minutes? So y'all partner up, and if you're at a table with 5, share with another.
Well, we have 2 tables of 5, so one person from there will partner up with one
There we
person
go.
from here.
So
Then
we
we
need a
should be
volunteer
perfect.
from these corner tables. Ah, there's one volunteer. To partner up with someone at this table. Look at you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Take 1 minute to think about how you're going to phrase your story. Since we only have one 3-minute timer on each table, sorry, I'll give it back to you. Some of you have cell phones that can time 3 minutes. So y'all get started, partner up, tell your story.